which is going to be.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. This really means a lot to us, so thank you. We're not going to read the whole book, I promise, but just for a little bit of context, and partly what I think we're going to do is try to show you kind of who Eve is, since Eve isn't here, because you can find out who we are. However, we're going to try to give you a little bit of an insight into a complex human, which is always fraught, but we'll give it a shot. A question Angie and I often get asked is if we knew Eve was misgendered, and did we realize something was amiss early in her childhood? The difficulty in answering this question is you are always living your life in the context of the moment, and that context does not always present itself with these kinds of questions. Hindsight lends clarity and context. With hindsight, we can say there definitely were signs. For example, it's true that Eve always chose Halloween costumes that were gender neutral, dressing as a chocolate bar, a marshmallow, or an androgynous character from a cartoon or a comic that we were unfamiliar with. Even at a very young age, pink was Eve's favorite color. There was a time on a trip to Disneyland when Eve was taking forever to select a souvenir from the gift shop. I tried to help, pointing out shirts and sweatshirts, but none were right. Only once I left her alone did she finally select a shirt from the girls section of the shop, and proudly wore it for the rest of the day. She always wore a shirt while swimming, even at a very young age, never feeling comfortable with going bare-chested, and never did so in public. After getting a particularly bad haircut, a cut that was much shorter than she'd hoped, she wore a baseball hat and glasses every day for a month until her hair grew to an acceptable length. There was a time in grade school where the teacher assigned students in the class to make an argument for either the British or the American side of the American Revolution. When Angie asked Eve which side she wished to represent, Eve said that she didn't agree with either side. Why does there always have to be a right and a wrong side, she asked. Why can't both sides be right? Eve's final product for this assignment was a poster that read, "When you pick a side, we all lose," which still hangs in our basement on the wall, by the way. At school, or when our families would get together to play games and somebody would suggest dividing into teams based on gender, Eve would say, "Why is that always the way to decide? Why not some other method?" I also remember a time when Eve objected to me killing a spider in our home. We live in a very old house prone to spiders, and when I went to dispatch one of them that had wandered into one of our sinks while we were away for the weekend, Eve protested, saying, "Why should something die just for being what it is?" Each of these instances make perfect sense in the context of Eve's gender dysphoria. And though we did take note that something was amiss, we understood she was sensitive and unique and had struggles with anxiety. We'd be lying if we claimed we anticipated one day she would tell us she was going to transition. Having a transgender child never occurred to us, not even once. So there, in the book, we kind of detail Eve's telling Angie in their conversation of telling her that she was transgender. So this is now her telling me. So a few months after Eve's conversation with Angie, we were at the dinner table waiting for Eve to join us. Meals never seem to be too high on Eve's priority list, so it is often a bit of a struggle to get her to the table with the rest of the family. This evening was no exception. When Eve arrived at the table, it was obvious that there was something distracting her. She kept looking at Angie with eyes that betrayed both dread and uncertainty. Angie broke the silence. "Mike, Eve has something to share with you." Eve's gaze at Angie intensified as if to say, "Do we have to do this now?" "What is it, sweetie?" I asked across the table. Eve held her gaze on Angie for a moment longer, then turned her attention to me. "I don't feel like a boy," she said. "I've never felt like a boy at any point in my entire life." She paused, gauging my response, likely expecting the worst. "Tell me more," I said. "I have always felt like a girl, and I don't want to be a boy." I looked at Angie, who was now holding Eve's hand and looking into her eyes with a gaze of both kindness and support. "Tell me what that looks like to you," I asked. "Pronouns," Eve replied after a lengthy pause. "What about them?" I asked. I want to go by she, not he, she added. Okay, I said. I'm sure you have given this lots of thought, and this cannot have been easy for you. However, I'm concerned that this might just be a fad, and you will change your mind someday down the road.
Not his best moment.
Not his best moment, yeah. Eve looked at Angie in that way that kids do when they are exasperated by something usually a parent has said or done. Dad, she said, this isn't a fad. This is who I am. With those words, something clicked in my head. Suddenly, all of the little clues, like pieces of a puzzle, began to form a picture in my mind, a picture of a reality I was now only being given access to. And I'm going to stop there because it goes on to something you don't know about yet. So, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Keep going.
Okay.
Okay. So our book, the first chapter is about telling our immediate family, and then the next chapter is about telling our broader family. So we kind of started with telling the story with just our family, and then getting a little broader with the rest of our family, and then our church family and community and that sort of thing. So, okay. Processing a new awareness of oneself is one thing. Telling others about it, a whole other thing. One full of fear and uncertainty, especially if it involves your child. Is this your own story to tell, or do you let them tell it? Is that too much to put on your child? Is this the natural consequence of their decision? Is it like having a new diagnosis of a chronic disease, like diabetes or cancer? How would I approach that situation with family members, since we are fortunate to not have that history? In asking Eve how she wanted to proceed, the answer was clear that she did not want to be the one to share her news with other family members. The fear of the potential rejection was too great. She had already dealt with that in the reveal to our immediate family. Now she hoped we could help her take the next steps alongside her, rather than having to proceed alone. Angie and I know a thing or two about growing up with fear and uncertainty hanging over us. We were both raised in families that were active members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'm going to kind of skip ahead here. Because of this background, we were a bit uncertain and maybe even fearful about sharing Eve's story with those outside of our close family ties. Even telling those within our family posed a significant risk. What if our parents refused to accept Eve? What if they not only couldn't accept Eve, but reactively blamed us, the progressive rebels, for turning her transgender? How would we explain to them that transgender kids are who they are and do not become so through indoctrination or grooming, as they likely had heard through their social media contacts and news outlets? This accusation never made any sense to us, as we have never micromanaged our kids' lives. We have concluded that those who make such accusations do so because they don't allow their kids to make any decisions on their own. So any decisions their kids make will naturally come from the demands of their parents. This is the only way that argument makes any sense to us. And then, let's see. I can't remember why I have that one. Maybe they'll just wait that. Okay. The next section is about telling our church family. Sorry, I don't have the book memorized.
Yeah.
Okay. So we had at this point told our families, I believe, and our circle of support was wide and staying strong so far. To be clear, there were people in our church who could not and would not accept Eve for who she was, but they were people with whom we were not especially close, and we wouldn't be one bit affected by their lack of acceptance, except for one person, our pastor. He had not been present at our prior small group meeting when we shared about Eve's name change. So on another evening, after our discussion, when people had gathered their food, put on their shirts, sorry, not their shirts.
It's a wild group.
Their shoes. Put on their shoes and coats to leave, and I pulled our pastor away from the others into our entryway. I understood that this conversation may be more difficult than the one with our group had been. I knew him to be a man who took pride in his position of authority and rarely questioned his own intuition on weighty matters. I couldn't recall any instances in our group discussions where he had expressed agreement with ideas or beliefs outside of those he already personally held. On the contrary, he spent most of his time trying to convince others that his belief on any given topic was the correct one. He seemed to believe he possessed the right answer, no matter the question, so this would not likely be an easy conversation. I shared with him that our youngest child was experiencing gender dysphoria and would now be going by the name Eve. He lowered his head and dropped his voice an octave, as he often did when he wanted to portray authority. Many kids can change their minds over time about gender identity, he said. You know, there was a time in college when a friend of mine questioned her sexuality, he added, but she grew out of it. I stared at him in disbelief. Was he really equating gender dysphoria with a passing uncertainty about sexual attraction? Did he even understand what gender dysphoria was? Did he even want to understand it? I mean, you and Mike know the science much better than I do, but every cell in that body is screaming male, he offered. That may be true, I replied, but Eve's brain is screaming female, and her brain has the power to kill the body in cases like this where they may not agree. I then shared the statistics on the suicide rate among transgender teens who do not have the support of their families and surrounding community members. I didn't tell you this to ask for your opinion, I said. We just wanted you to know what was going on in our family.
The next part's really good, so.
So you have to get the book to read it.
No spoiler alert.
Okay. Let's see. I think the others. So how are we with time? What do you want to?
I'll turn on this mic.
Okay. And then we've got.
So just.
Does anyone have any questions, comments, anything so far? We have a microphone right there, and if somebody wants to, should we not offer it to somebody to pass it around? Jim, pass it around.
I have a question. How old was he when you had these discussions?
I should know this off the top of my head, but I always have to do the math. Yeah, so yeah, she was 13. Yeah.
That's an excellent question. We should have included that. Sorry.
Yeah. Did we not include that in the book?
It's in the book, but I didn't read it.
But thank you for, yeah.
Any other questions?
We'll take some notes for the next edition.
I'm just curious, and this may be an unfair question, but you talk a lot about the pushback and things that might look like it's just like horrified, depressed, whatever, but having been down at the state house for a session, probably I shouldn't have been, but in those conversations, I find the pushback that your family and others receive, someone is family from a libertarian and others. I haven't quite figured out what fear is it. And I believe it's fear. What is it that's driving them to be so resistant to being accepted? And I don't know if it's
Do you want to
church
read
or whatever, but I'm just curious. And there may be multiple that you guys have faced this for years.
Yeah.
But that's what Boise's counseling is the fear and the hate. What's driving that?
Okay. Excellent question, Wayne. So just give me 3 minutes. So the deal is,
We have a section in the book we could read.
this is more detailed than what's in the book. So there are people in our country right now who sadly have a lot of power. And they basically align with the white Christian nationalists, the NAR movement, if you know what that means. But Russ Vogt, who's going to be the new OMB director, he's like super high up on this, and Project 2025 is all about this. But the fear, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, is that, okay, hang on to your shorts. Time is running out on America because the American dream has never been allowed to be fulfilled. Because what you and I know as America and love about America is a distortion. America will only be America when Jesus is the head of the government. So they believe that people like Eve and other family members in the LGBT community, their biggest sin is that they cannot reproduce white babies. That's what they want. That's why they're going to get rid of birth control. That's why they want women in the house. They want white women producing white babies. So Eve is a threat to them because Eve can't reproduce in the way that they want. And I know that sounds crazy, but Google Russ Vogt, and I think I nailed it. Like, it's bad and it's weird and it's freaky, but that's what it is. It has nothing to do with, them going into women's bathrooms to, all of that, total smokescreen. And by the way, if you notice, the people who are actually getting caught for pedophilia are not transgender people. So.
And maybe assuming that you raised your family in a conservative context, but I heard you hint at being Seventh-day Adventist. I'm curious, what have you found space to continue a spiritual path, or what does that look like as parents and creating, I don't know, a new belief system or I'm curious.
I love that question. Thank you.
System? A new what system? A new something system. Okay, all right. The reason he handed this to me is because he does not have a spiritual, what would we say, belief anymore? Yeah. Yeah, and I think everybody's individual, right, with that. So I don't, if anyone's read the book, we grew up in different types of households, both though within that church. So within any religion, you see, some diversity about that approach, right? So my family, I always said, was kind of one foot in, one foot out. His was definitely more in the center of that. And so I feel like my faith was less about the church specifically. So I have found, thanks to some friends who are here tonight, even just, lots of ways of finding the mystery of spirituality and that it's so much about love and loving people for who they are, and with some online New York City church groups that I can be a part of if I'm there or if I'm not there, and just books and getting together with friends. That is part of my life.
So I would add, if you have read the book, Our Small Group, there's a number of those people who are here tonight, and they've kind of allowed, I think, both of us to stay attached to the community element of that in a deep and meaningful way. So they're very important to us. So thank you for that question. That was good.
Yeah. I would say our kids, and again in our book, and I think it's just so typical, 13, 14, they're just like, we don't want anything to do with us, other than the people in the church, they're part of their family, right? And so, and the people that have continued to be part of our small group are definitely part of the family, not the pastor. Yeah, but like Eve was down in Twin Falls visiting some friends this summer, or in the fall, I guess, and she was like, "Oh, I'm in this park. It's a Sunday. There's a like Universalist church," and she went in there. She's like, "This is awesome." So she just embraces that more. Isabel's definitely not into that.
Out of curiosity, at the time, how did it disclose this to you? How did she react to the concept of maybe her church family not being as accepting? Did it affect her coming out at all, or her conversations with you guys? Did she share any of that with you?
Oh, that's a really good question. Eve was super fortunate in that at the time that she was still attending church, the youth group that she was a part of was really outstanding. And I don't see Alan here. One of the instructors is in our small group too. And that was really, really great. But that group got usurped by the pastor. And so then it went from being a discussion group to a give me the right answer group. So Eve kind of had already left by then. Also, though, all of her friends were just like, who cares? Totally fine. So the support was there. It was just no longer in the church building.
Yeah, but the small group that we had, we had a lot of friends that were LGBTQ friends, and just people that just knew her and loved her and knew this was who she was, and they were within our church. So there were a lot of people that were very accepting and loving.
I'm curious about what your journey looked like as parents, learning more about being transgender, what that is, like, from the starting point to getting full acceptance.
That's a great question. Mine was really awful, actually. At the time, and we didn't mention this in the book, but we had there was another couple family actually at our church who they had a transgender son. And our kids were about the same age. And so they were very close and we would do a lot of stuff with them. And she was from
the mother.
Yes, the mother was from a very conservative country in Europe. And so having a mini-me daughter was really important to her. So when Gabe transitioned, she was just like not having any of it. And my less than shining parental moment was I'm not even going to say that. She and I kind of pooled our ignorance quite often. And we were both, for a brief period of time, convinced that somebody online was influencing our kids to do this. This just wasn't this was not who we knew our kids to be. So for obvious reasons, I didn't put that in the book because it makes me look like a schmuck. But for a while, I did kind of feel like, what in the world? We would go to our cabin in McCall and she and I would just commiserate and wind each other up. And it was really stupid in retrospect.
I usually take the scientific approach to most things. There was a point that we talked about in the book again that like a lot of people that we knew would say, "Oh, I thought he was gay," and since she was young, and I'd say, "Okay, a 5-year-old is not. We're not talking about attraction. We're talking about who she is. Like what you're talking about is who she is. It's her qualities that you saw, So I had less of a like, this is who she is approach. I just thought she is who she is, and that's kind of how I came to it. But as soon as she told me, I started researching, and the first thing I saw was the suicide rate of people who aren't accepted by at least one person. So I'm a physician, and I thought about my patients too. I thought, like, as a physician, we have to be a safe person. If people can tell one person that they're not even in the family, it decreases that suicide if they have a family that accepts them, that rate goes down to pretty similar to teenagers, all teenagers, which is horribly bad as well. But yeah, so and then I just continue to learn, go to conferences, read, do all of that, and that was my approach. Did that answer your question?
So, I found out that I was trans when I was in my 30s, but my question is, since she found out when she was younger, did she deal with any kind of body dysmorphia or anything similar to that? Because I feel like that's a pretty common thing in the trans community, and I feel like as somebody who has a developmental disability as well, that's also a common thing. So I feel like I'm wondering if she ever did deal with any body dysmorphia when she was growing up or now, and what that looks like throughout her life.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Well, I mean, first of all, we all know that we are not a monolith, so everybody's different, right? This is just her story, and a lot of people, by the way, will say, "What does she think of us writing this book?" And she gets so sick of me asking her that over and over. She's like, "I told you, it's fine." Yeah, still, she's my daughter, so she acts that way. Yeah, well, I think for most, well, I shouldn't say for most, for a lot of people with gender dysphoria, when their body is prepubertal, there's not a lot of difference to anybody looking, right? It's easier to be who you are with your haircut or your clothes or whatever. And so I think for a lot of people that dysphoria really heightens as you start to go through puberty. And that was when we became, which she decided to tell us. So yes, there definitely was gender dysphoria. I think if you're not allowed to be who you are, that just really worsens, right? And, so many times I think we hear, and I've heard Eve talk about this as well, that, if you can't allow someone to have gender affirming care and to be who they are, obviously we already talked about suicide rates are really high. But the privilege of being able to actually transition through as you go through puberty is just much more natural. You don't achieve a height of a gender that you're not wanting to be, or that you weren't, I guess. There's just a lot more that you don't have to reverse. Like people that say, I don't want my kid to have gender affirming care as a teenager, are really subjecting their children to having more surgery, to having a lot more trauma. And that does not get talked about enough, in my opinion.
Great question.
I have a question about any moments of unexpected joy that came about that you just maybe not expected.
If you don't have anything, I do.
Yeah, go.
Oh, how about just 2 events?
Well,
That's what I was going to say. But yeah.
yeah. So I don't want to spoil anything, so this is not a real. But Eve and I went to New York City when she was looking at colleges, and so we were staying. Our travel agent's kind of a low budget travel agent, and so we were staying in, where were we? We were in Harlem, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, we were in Harlem. 2 white people from Idaho. It was great. But Eve has a thing about New York style pizza. And so on the back of the book, she's got this flowy white thing she was wearing. And she was wearing that. And fishnet, hose and boots and shorts and this thing and the whole and sunglasses in there, the whole look. She had the whole
And the
thing
eye
going.
makeup.
Yeah,
She's
and the eye
got quite
makeup.
an eye makeup game.
And so we went out to in busy street and just crazy and people saying inappropriate things to women. And, it was just like, oh my gosh, can we really, if she ends up coming here, is this going to work? And I just kind of sat back and watched, and she had this strut about her that was just like, don't mess with me, I'm at home. And that was like, that it was exactly what you're asking. It was just this moment of joy and shock and, everything, all the emotions at once. But yeah, that was a really good one.
This is less about Eve, and more about just the community. Coming from a background of fairly conservative church, there was a lot of inauthenticity, as you often see within religions. A lot of, this, I have to be a certain way. Again, I had less of that. My mother is exceedingly authentic, and just say whatever the hell she wants. And I love that about her. So coming from that background, though, is just the authenticity of people who have had to struggle to figure out who they are, or I should say, I think a lot of people know who they are. I think it's feeling safe to tell people and to be that person. And so that is just, I love being being a part of the Trans Joy community, because there's a lot of joy.
Is there an instance you can think of where someone did a real face, and what was it that changed? Didn't have their mind or seemed even more able to accept the.
Are you asking? You can clarify.
I am sure that we have those stories, Frank. I can't think of one right now, but I do want to share one that I saw this week that was amazing. I don't know what part of the country it was in, probably the South, could have been Idaho. There was an anti-trans bill coming up, and there was an older gentleman who just was like straight out of Central Casting. I mean, this dude was exactly what you'd expect. And he stepped up to the microphone and he said, I came here tonight to speak in favor of this bill that was an anti-trans bill. And he said, but in waiting to testify, I've met all these people back here. And he said, they're great. And he said, I'm going to change and he said, I'm sorry, but I'm changing. I'm actually against the bill, and I think we should leave these people the hell alone. So, amazing. And, maybe that's happened close to us. Nobody has said anything, but, it's out there and it's catching and it's cool.
Knowing that you mentioned Eve was about 13 at the beginning of the book, and presumably dependent on you all for transportation, things like that. How were you all able to either seek out and build or find a community for Eve of other trans kids?
Eve went to Boise High. So,
Gabe.
Yeah, and we had the aforementioned Gabe, our family friend. And she was also like the president or something of the GSA club at North. And then online. I know it sounds kind of weird, and yes, we are good parents, sort of. I think
that's what kids do.
Yeah, that's what kids do, right? But Boise High, I just cannot say enough about that. I mean, just tremendous.
She also went to a TVMSC, which is a Treasure Valley Math and Science for a while. Did not go well during the pandemic. And her principal there was interesting. I don't think she's here tonight, so I can probably talk about her. She was so interesting. Man, we would go to some of the, I don't know, the initial in beginning of the year meetings, and oh my gosh, would she go on and on about stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, where does she think these smart kids come from? I think she can go a little faster with her information. We were just all so like, oh my gosh, so boring. But I went to her at the beginning of 8th grade, I guess it was, and said, here's the deal. This is Eve, and she's changed her name, and she wants to use the female bathrooms. And we had gone to, she also went to North, so it was sort of a shared school year day, in fact. And so at North, the counselor we met with was like, hey, we've got the nurse's bathroom. And Eve was like, okay. And I was like, much cleaner than the other bathroom. It totally is. But at CVMSC, the principal was like, okay, yeah, she can use the bathroom, the girls' bathroom. She's like, there's stalls. If anyone is concerned about what's going on in those stalls, they need to talk to me anyway. So she was like all over supporting her, and it was awesome.
I had a question about, I oftentimes hear parents and maybe family members of folks talk about mourning the loss of the person that they live. But writing kind of a little bit to what you alluded to before, can you tell us about what you gained in this year?
Yeah, we gained a kid who is living authentically. Yeah, that's a really great question. I'll piggyback off of that briefly. I've had people ask me this because, I lost a son, which we say in the book, like, even I never really, like, we'd go fishing and, she's like, what happens to the fish when you catch it? Well, we may take it home and eat it. Well, let's go back. I don't want to do that. And, we catch grasshoppers down by Jim and Jen's house. And she's like, why are you catching these? He says, well, we're going to put them on a hook. And she's like, let's just let them go. We have food in the refrigerator. So, none of that. But there was a time, one evening where we went downstairs and we're talking to Eve. And normally, the downstairs, it's like one of us will go down there and then, you come back up and you do a debriefing, how is everything? Is anything burning? That kind of thing. And, but both of us went down there for some goofy reason. And we were talking with Eve, and Eve was very kind of impatient, like kids are, right? Like, get out of my room, I'm, whatever. And so we were there for a long time. And then finally she went to bed, and, we went upstairs. Years later, she told us she was planning on killing herself that night. Mm-hmm. So we gained a daughter.
Yeah. 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 We talked about, we have people we know that I think mourn that more, the loss of this child that they thought they had, I guess. And there's a quote that we need to raise the children we have, not the ones we want. And I think that, I do, as a family physician, I've seen a lot of people over the years that are pregnant, and a lot of people are like, oh, I have a boy. I'm so excited. I'm pregnant and I have a girl. And I never felt that. I never did. And I think some people are just a lot more attached to that gender of that child. And so then I think they mourn it more, and I was lucky. I never was like, I want a healthy child and I want a happy child. And, I think that is easier when that's your approach. And some people are much more attached to that gender.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a transgender daughter, Leah. And we are so absolutely proud of her. She's was a girl for really since she was about 3 or 4 years old. And there was lots of signs. So I am so happy that Lee's experience through school, with teachers and principals were supportive. Unfortunately, that has not really been our experience. It's been difficult. And I think the schools more so want to stick with the laws, with the bathrooms, and they don't want to be, and I don't want Leah to be the poster child for, bathroom use at Answer. And Answer is supposed to be kind of a woke school, right? And it's been difficult. I've been called a hyper parent first, trying to stick up for her. And I'm just an advocate for my child, just like any other parent would be. But my question for Leah really is, she is so proud of who she is. And she knows she's amazing, and she likes to share that she's trans with her community. And with the current political climate, I've always encouraged her, and I've said, yes, absolutely, we'll stand right behind you. But with this political climate where we are, it's like also really important that we keep our bodies safe. And so it's like, well, maybe this year we just don't really talk about it so loudly with people we don't really know if they're supportive or not. And that's really hurt her. And she calls it her little gut feeling that this just feels bad because she can't be her authentic self. And so that's been difficult to navigate. And I think we come to the conclusion, you share whatever you want to share, and Mommy will deal with everything else. So I'm just wondering if that's kind of the right approach to this in Idaho. I know we're in Boise, so there's so much kind of serious.
Yeah.
Well, first off, thank you. And Leah, we're proud of you. Way to go. Good job. I think you've probably done her a tremendous service just by showing her that, there are things about you and things that and things that you say that are not going to be popular and people aren't going to like. And that's not going to end, in a couple of years. That's the rest of your life. And so it's a harsh lesson to learn at that age. None of us had to learn it in the same way. But you know what? I don't understand why we aren't celebrating these kids and raising them up, because the courage and the strength and depth of character, like, that's always the right thing. So be you always. Always. Be safe, but always be you.
I was reading Jennifer Finney Boylan. I don't know if people know her book, and I can't remember the name of the first one that she wrote, but it was, I think, after she first transitioned, so it was like 20-some years ago. But she has this wonderful relationship with this friend, and they kind of talked. There was a lot of kind of back and forth, but the friend had this great comment about, like, what's between your ears is so much important than what's between your legs. And it's just like, people get real. Like, we want kind children, and we want children that are authentic. Just like, I know with Eve, and I just kind of the way in life that I'm just like I said to the pastor, like, I'm not asking for your agreement or your permission. I'm just telling you, this is what's happening. This is my child, and she is who she is, and you can get out of our lives if you want.
We're going to shift just a little bit. We're going to join you, Pacey and myself, and we're going to continue the